Hello, welcome to the Tea and Tarot group's interview. Very exciting with the creators of the Pistis Sophia deck, which has come out, a majors only goddess tarot by Kim Huggens and Nick Phillips. I'm quite pleased to have made the acquaintance of Nick in Glastonbury a number of years ago. Welcome. And he's got just brilliant, beautiful artwork. And Kim has created this gorgeous book that serves as the guide for this tarot and worked with Nick on the creation of the Pistis Sophia Tarot, as well as a previous deck, the Sol Invictus Tarot. And today I'm going to be interviewing them about the creation of this deck, which we previously unboxed and explored together in our Tea and Tarot monthly gathering. So thank you, Nick and Kim, for being here today with us and sharing a little bit about your process of creation of this deck. Let me just share a little bit about our illustrious guests. Kim Huggens' first tarot deck, Sol Invictus, the God Tarot, was published in 2007. And her first book, Tarot 101, Mastering the Art of Reading the Cards, came out in 2010. Later, she worked with artist Eric C. Dunn to create the best-selling Tarot Illuminati, and together they created a sister deck, Tarot Apocalypsis. Kim's passion for tarot is matched by her passion for mythology, and she has edited 3 anthologies exploring mythological themes, From a Drop of Water, Versus, and Memento Mori. She completed postgraduate studies in ancient history, focusing on the magic and religion of the classical and late antique world. Kim lives in Wales in the United Kingdom with her partner and a black cat. We have a black cat here too, Kim. We're sisters in black cattery. And Nick, following the publication of Sol Invictus, the God Tarot with Kim Huggens, Nick Phillips almost immediately began to work on the Pistis Sophia deck with Kim, while also expanding his artwork into different media on a larger scale. With a keen interest in the folklore of the British Isles, he wrote and illustrated the Celtic saints of Western Britain and moved to live and work in Glastonbury, the United Kingdom, surrounded by its Arthurian history and esoteric mystery, where he produces spiritual and goddess-themed artwork. Nick's other research interests include world mythology and the nature of pilgrimage, and he is currently working on a book about the Black Madonna. And so looking forward to that book, Nick, and love your artwork, which is how we first connected. So thank you so much both for being here today. And I suppose my first question is, how did the two of you meet and what drew you to working together?
Well, it goes right back to when we were 18, 19 years old in university. We both attended Cardiff University, and we both attended the university's pagan society. And I think that's where we met at one of their meetings.
I think it was one of the first meetings, wasn't it, in fact? And
yeah,
we were like, Nick was one of my first friends in Cardiff. And, yeah.
And then we ended up in second year of uni living together for some years. And Kim became the president of the Pagan Society in due course, and I was the secretary. And we set about organising trips to places like Stonehenge, Cornwall, and weekly gatherings, and just kind of talking about tarot and all sorts.
Oh, wonderful. Was there anything, I mean, it just sounds really magical, like a magical kind of coming together at a very, a time when a lot of us are just awakening to the realities of our living mythologies, that we're living amongst the places that our legends are written about. And certainly in the UK, I think there's even more kind of a heart connection for that, because there those mythologies are still extant in the landscape, whereas in the United States, we've had a lot of contestation around the mythologies that were here and the mythologies that arrived. And it's been sometimes harmonious and sometimes not harmonious. When you began to go to sacred sites and pilgrimage with your group, did you ever perform ceremonies at these places, like in Stonehenge? And you know, you kind of took your living spirituality out into the land?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very much so. So we would often try and make these trips around the 8 Sabbats, for instance, and connect with the energies of the time as well as the place. And we would not only hold our own ceremonies, but we would attend ceremonies being held by the communities in those places, particularly places like Glastonbury, where there's a thriving neo-pagan community and a spiritual community there who hold regular celebrations, rituals, services, that kind of thing. So it was quite an honor, really, to be able to not only gift our own ceremonies to the community, but attend other people's and have that gift given back. And I think I do recall actually creating some tarot spreads as a result of these ceremonies in these sacred places, like a tarot spread inspired by Glastonbury Tor, for instance, a tarot spread inspired by the sacred baths in Bath, UK. So yeah, it was definitely a very formative experience going to all these wonderful places and interacting with these mythologies and these landscapes, and meeting each other and becoming creative partners and working together towards this creative goal. I think really helped metamorphose ourselves into a bit more of what we wanted to be in the world. So yeah.
You know, I think the bonds that we create in ritual setting can be just so transformational. And it sounds like it gave rise to a wonderful body of work, which now includes this deck. So the Pistis Sophia at this time is a majors only deck, although of course I'm sure your audience is just would die to have the rest of it. But the cards are beautifully illustrated. The themes that come in throughout the deck are really detailed. And I'm curious, what was your decision in this deck to bring together goddesses from various different cultures along with saints? And did you ever have any hard time choosing sort of when to go with a saint, when to go with a goddess? Were there any kind of confusion, confusing moments around, well, I can see this goddess as this card, but I could also see this goddess as this card?
So I'm just going to take a moment to appreciate this beautiful cat.
So did you want to start on that?
Yeah, I'll start on that one. I think for me, one of the things I learned through a lot of this research was that goddesses and saints and folkloric figures, which are also in the deck, to a large extent are very similar in how they're venerated or worked with. In some traditions, saints are served in a way very similar to the way goddesses are served in other traditions. And in some traditions, they're almost seen as one and the same. The line is very blurred. So, for instance, I'm initiated in Haitian voodoo, and my voodoo societe also works in 21 divisions voodoo and sansei. And in those traditions, the saints are on the same level as gods, and gods are treated in the same way as saints are. They're all seen as spirits, as aspects of the divine, but with their own objective existence. So for us, there wasn't really a dichotomy between goddess, saint, folklore figure. Even in some cases, historical figures with the Sol Invictus Tarot, for instance, we use those. So that wasn't the problem. I think you touched on the difficulties with choosing which figures go in which decks. And that was very, very hard. We would often have to start with identifying the core theme of this particular card and almost kind of shortlisting deities that we'd heard of, researching online, Googling, gods of agriculture, things like that, and just creating this very broad shortlist of possibly suitable figures, and expanding out from there into deeper research to identify more of the minutiae of that theme. So for instance, if I could, I'll grab the Tower card. This is a really good example, because for the Tower card is Oya. One of the possibilities that we could have had for that card was Kali Smashan, Kali of the cemetery, of the graveyard, the destructive aspect of Kali Ma. They're both figures, spirits, deities of destruction. But when you get down to the minutiae of that theme of the Tower card, of the destruction of the ego and the self, but also the lightning strike of divine inspiration, then Kali Smashan became less of a possibility, because Oya is the spirit, or she is one of the spirits of the storm, of the tornado, and that lightning strike that often accompanies storms and tornadoes just felt so symbolically right. So that's kind of one of the ways in which we would choose these figures, but it wasn't always easy. And there were discussions for many, many months over certain cards, for instance. Some came more easily than others. And we also had to be quite careful to make sure there was a balance of cultures in the deck. We wanted to be a truly multicultural deck and not allow our Western mindset to limit where we were going with it. So sometimes something would come into our minds as being wonderfully appropriate for a card, when we'd have to say, actually, is that just us going the easy route? Are there other figures that embody this card that are outside of our own knowledge and expertise? So.
Yeah, and it really shows in the deck. The deck is a fantastically multicultural deck. And as I was going through it with my group, we were, all of us, marveling at how you had managed to find, not just, I've kind of seen it in the past where sometimes there's like this idea of just add a bunch of multicultural goddesses and stir. And instead you were able to really retain the flavor of each individual goddess and her, or figure, and her mythology. And I did notice that it was well rooted within the context of good research. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. How about you, Nick? Were there any cards as you were going along that you thought, ooh, I could see this one for this, I could see this one? Anything that came up for you that as you were kind of in this selection process that you felt like, oh, I really want to see this figure here, this feels right, or, but where there were kind of some challenges?
Yeah, so you mentioned about getting a balance of goddesses and saints, and we didn't want to have too many saints because it's a goddess tarot where people might become a saint tarot. We did originally have Saint Perpetua for our strength card with a different design, and this is the one that it ended up being. And I think we didn't want to potentially have too many saints, so we looked for an alternative and designed a card around Babylon. And I love the design of this one, but the actual choice for the card, when we looked into it a bit more, it didn't fit. And we went back to Perpetua. And I think we kind of, we sat with that for quite a while and realized that she was perfect for the strength card.
I agree. And when I was reading through the deck, I did notice that Perpetua had a very powerful story, and it really talked all about how she fought. It says here, she fought an immense battle against evil and triumphed. And to mark her victory, the hand of God descends, holding out a branch with golden apples on it. Gentle woman has overcome the fierce bestial force that holds all humans, and according to Christian belief at the time, in particular, all women, back from paradise. I thought that was so, when I saw that reading through this, I really went deeper with it. I was like, wow, because that is, truly the nature of that strength card, is that gentle prevalence, to endure, and that enduring is triumph. And it was really fantastic. And I can very much see, as you're sharing, how Babylon would make a great strength card, really stellar actually, but maybe not quite in keeping with the theme you were going for here. So, well, I certainly hope we'll get to see that Babylon image elsewise, another time, in some other venue. Tell me a little bit, in the deck, some of the cards do seem to bring in nods to Rider-Waite imagery and some of the other classical tarot imagery, and then some Rider-Waite-Smith imagery, but some of them are a complete departure and they go in their whole own direction. When you were creating the deck, did you look through classical tarot images and find specific symbols that you wanted to include? Or were there certain symbols in classical tarot imagery that you specifically didn't want to include?
Well, I think it was a case with both decks, actually, that it was more important to get the meaning into the card and not necessarily like, we've got to get seven swords into that image, got to get them in there. So it was less about the traditional imagery of like the Rider-Waite and other decks, because it's not, it's an old system and it's not exactly to modern audiences. It's not as accessible perhaps as what we wanted to put into this deck. So it was more about the core meanings and retaining the goddess or the figure in the card, her imagery. It's more to do with the, deriving it from the research than from traditional tarot.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense because it really is a very fresh presentation. And I noticed as I was paging through the deck, there were a few images that really surprised me because I've been a professional tarot reader for 18 years. And so I've worked with a lot of different decks, but I love when a deck can kind of surprise me, take me in a new direction, or just by, in Tibetan Buddhism, we call this tongdrol, the liberation upon seeing, where you look at an image and it awakens you. I love that we have Tarot Kitty. What we have to give this cat their subjectivity. What is this cat's name?
Her name's Bina.
Hello, Bina. Hello, Bina. Oh, the wonderful tarot cat. But I did notice that, in some cards, there do seem to be little nods, little homages. For example, in the magician card, Isis, she's got one arm up and one arm down, in a very classical gesture that we might recognize from the traditional tarot. But then, and the symbols of the elements are around her. So certainly, there's a nod there. But in other cards, like, for example, the previously mentioned strength card, or in the card that you chose for the Emperor, Nuwa, construct is your name for the card, showing that this kind of serpentine goddess. It was very fresh. It gave me a new look on the meaning of that card. So as people go through this deck, I really encourage you to take some time with each card and see what seems familiar to you and what seems very unique, because inside of those unique additions, and perspectives, I found, new ways of even thinking about the meanings of the traditional cards. And then, as we're going through the deck, we can look at the images and see, these kind of symbols that are well explained within the book. But when I got into the book about this deck, I have to tell you, my eyes were just like, because it is not the little pamphlet that comes with a tarot deck. It is nothing like any other tarot book that, you know, tarot companion book that I've ever seen. It is so detailed. There is so much good research, and the research is cited, which is fantastic. Thank you so much for all the work that you put into this. How did you find your sources that you've cited in this book? How long did it take to write the book? And, you know, how do you feel like the book and the deck harmonize together?
So I come from an academic background. So for me, research and citation is very important. And I've always loved it when I pick up a book and it's well cited. There's an extensive bibliography, it's robust and it's rigorous. Because for me, that is the way that I can allow the reader to do their own research after they finish the book, which is absolutely vital for people's journeys and gaining of knowledge. So one of the things we wanted to get across with this deck, as the name Pistis Sophia suggests, is this reunion in a way of rigorous intellectual research and understanding and an academic approach to these things with sorry, my cat's at my feet sneezing. With the intuitive approach to tarot and the way that people can personally connect with these cards. So we've got these amazingly symbolic images which Nick has created, and then united with that, we've got the academically sound, hopefully, research that becomes the book. As for how I found the sources, usually the process of research begins very, very general, and I'm not. Yeah, I will admit we use Google a lot. You start off by Googling ISIS, and you get all these wonderful and terrible results based on your search. And from there, you kind of start to specialize and go deeper into it. And eventually you'd find reading lists, bibliographies, you'd be able to identify what the source texts are and what the good translations of those texts are. Which is really important as well, because when we're working with a lot of these texts in English, there is a lot of bias by the interpreter and the translator. So we've got to be very careful in the versions of the translations that we choose. And eventually what I would usually do is I'd get a selection of books on the subject that I was looking at. And once I'd finished with those, I would look at their bibliographies and I would get those books and so on and so forth, kind of following a breadcrumb trail. So I think it usually took about 30 to 40 hours of research per card, per chapter. And a lot of that was reading stuff that ended up not being used at all, either because it wasn't rigorous enough or because it wasn't something we really wanted to pick up on in that particular chapter. Because of course there's a lot of aspects to these deities which we haven't touched upon because there's just no room. They're so complex and multifaceted. So I think for every work that's cited in the book, there's probably 3 or 4 works that I read and just didn't include, didn't use at all. But none of it was wasted. It was all a way to kind of formulate my own thinking and the way I was going to approach this particular figure. For some of them, it was quite easy because I already owned a lot of the texts for them, such as Isis and Nut, the Egyptian deities. I already had a lot of Egyptology books from my postgrad studies, and the Greek and Roman stuff I already had as well. But not only did I find it difficult to source the original texts and the sacred texts concerning Japanese and Chinese, for instance, I found that there was not as much focus in Western academia on those areas. For whatever reason that might be, that's a whole different conversation, I think. So there's also that difficulty that is faced when researching something like this. So it was a journey in and of itself, but a very, very rewarding one.
Well, I'll say, you know, this is quite an impressive bibliography. I'll hold it up so that folks can see. It's a tiny typeface, and that goes on for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pages of tiny, tiny text where it's cited beautifully. Anyone who comes to this book can look something up, and if something magically sparks you and you feel like, wow, I've never read this before, I never knew this about this goddess or this figure, and you want to go track it down, it's handy to be able to do that. Nick, when you were creating the images, did the images sort of bubble up from within, or did you also do a similar survey of the images of these goddesses, or was it a little bit of both?
I think a lot of it was through our conversations, and we'd talk about what we wanted to go into the card, and then Kim would draw little stick figure things and go like this, and I'd go, okay, and then do something slightly less stick man, and then I think it just worked out between in conversation really. And then it's the same with all of my art. It just kind of happens. There's kind of no like in between. It all just kind of.
It sort of seems like, it really does seem with your artwork as if it just pours through you. You know, that you're the instrument of this image that wants to come into being, because your artwork is so very diverse and varied, and you do a great job of locating the subject of the image in a very empowered way that does not objectify the being. And I feel like, especially in the West, in modern goddess culture, there can sometimes be that risk of objectification, because we in the West are conditioned with an objectifying gaze. So we have to kind of work our way beyond that. And it just feels like, Nick, you channel something, you know, to use a word that's a little bit touchy, but you channel something that comes through in such a beautiful way, and where it feels like the deity is arising from within the image, not that they're sort of a static subject to be feasted upon. And I feel like that's something very powerful in this deck, and in your work in general. While you were creating this deck, did you have any magical occurrences that confirmed that your process was correct, or any dreams, coincidences, or other phenomena that guided the process?
I think there was. It's hard to remember now, because I think things like that kind of happen and then you kind of forget about them in a sense. We did have, I think this was when it was coming towards the publication stage, and we were feeling a bit like that kind of slight nervousness about how is this going to be received. And this was actually at a voodoo fete that we were both at, and we had in attendance Papa Gede with us, and speaking to each person in turn, and you know, is there anything you want to ask? And we asked about the deck. You know, how is this going to be? Is it going to be accepted? What are people going to think? And generally, the answer we got was, "Just do it. It's great. Just do it." So that kind of a very straightforward message there. But personally, I don't really get those kind of dreams. I don't know about Kim, but
it's okay.
I don't get dreams. I've never been someone who kind of has those things come up in my mind in a way, but I found that the whole process itself was very magical, because we often found we were being kind of led or guided in a way, kind of by ourselves. You know, you just end up researching the right things. You end up drawing the right things, which it turns out actually are part of that figure's archaeology or history, for instance, and you didn't know that in the first place. And you just kind of, as you're researching and learning, you pick up more stuff that just seems to come to you at the right time. I remember a trip to the British Museum when we were researching and starting to formulate the image for Newt, the universe. And I stood before one of the Egyptian mummies they have in their Egyptology section, and it's this beautiful coffin, and it shows you the inside of the coffin lid, which the deceased person would have had facing them, and it was the starry body of Newt herself, surrounded by the zodiac, with the bark of Ra above her and the bird carrying the symbol of life below her. And it's almost, by that point, I think we had already sketched out that image for Newt. And I just looked at it and thought, wow, we're on the right track. Here it is in this person's coffin from all those millennia ago. And it was a very beautiful.
Very one in that museum. I know what you're talking about.
It's stunning, isn't it? Yes. But I think one of the biggest occurrences, again, not really magical, but kind of because it ended in a tarot reading, which confirmed things, was how we came up with the title for the deck, Pistis Sophia. And it's quite a hard one to explain. So if you don't mind, I'd actually like to read the section I wrote about it from the book. It's quite a short section, but I can't speak it again as well as I've written it here.
What a treat to get to hear you read it.
Okay. It took Nick and me around 9 months to find a suitable name for this deck. We needed a title that would emphasize the academic approach we had taken to the goddesses in the cards, while also retaining the intuitive and spiritual aspect of working with the deck. It was our goal to reunite the intuitive, creative, spiritual approach with the logical, scholarly approach, with one informing the other. I'd long been interested in Gnostic texts from around the 2nd century CE, and was rereading some of them one day when I was reminded of the idea in many sects of what is now called Gnosticism, particularly in the Valentinian tradition, that wisdom and the soul were embodied as feminine. In a text dating from some time before the 4th century CE, found in the Nag Hammadi Library in 1945, we read that, quote, "Wise men of old gave the soul a feminine name. Indeed, she is female in her nature as well. She even has her womb." The text continues to use the imagery of the soul as a prostitute, giving herself to men in the hope that each new one that came along would be her true bridegroom and lead to her salvation. This allegory of the soul's journey as a veiled whore is one that is found repeatedly in literature about the feminine embodiment of wisdom. And, quote, "The distinction between the street-walking whore looking for trade and the diligent wife seeking her husband is a fine one." In the book of Proverbs, wisdom is described as a woman crying aloud in the street, who later scolds those who do not attend to her quickly and threatens to refuse them even though they search diligently for her. And there's a quote here from the New International Version of Proverbs. "Out in the open, wisdom calls aloud. She raises her voice in the public square. On top of the wall, she cries out. At the city gate, she makes her speech." Throughout the Old Testament, New Testament, and Apocrypha, we find more references to wisdom and the soul as feminine beings. Yet one of the most beautiful pieces about her is found in the Nag Hammadi Library, along with many other Gnostic texts, called Thunder Perfect Mind. Spoken by what appears to be wisdom herself in a series of paradoxical statements that mimic Greek identity riddles, we read about the nature of wisdom and her femininity. "I was sent forth from the power, and I have come to those who reflect upon me, and I have been found among those who seek after me. Look upon me, you who reflect upon me, and you hearers hear me. You who are waiting for me, take me to yourselves, and do not banish me from your sight. And do not make your voice hate me, nor your hearing. Do not be ignorant of me anywhere or any time. Be on your guard. Do not be ignorant of me. For I am the first and the last. I am the honored one and the scorned one. I am the whore and the holy one. I am the wife and the virgin. I am the mother and the daughter. I am the members of my mother. I am the barren one, and many are my sons." There's more to the text than that, but I just used an extract. The beginning of the text seems to reflect earlier Gnostic creation myths, such as those found in the Apocryphon of John, wherein one of the first creations of the unnamed God was forethought or wisdom in female form. It continues with more paradoxical statements that point to the identity of the speaker as wisdom. This female wisdom, not herself a goddess, but instead an abstract concept given feminine form, seemed perfect for a goddess tarot deck that lent itself to intellectual understanding and the intuitive use of these figures. So what is the name of this figure in the original language of the many Gnostic texts? In Greek, it is Sophia. Further perusal of Gnostic texts reveal one called Pistis Sophia, which roughly translates to faith wisdom, indicating a close relationship and interplay in the spiritual realm between wisdom and intellectual understanding and faith and intuitive understanding. Sophia herself was already cast as our High Priestess card, and a one-card tarot reading later, we were sold on the name of the deck. We had drawn the High Priestess.
Wow. What a great confirmation. And I am, and there she is. And I am familiar with that Thunder Perfect Mind, and, think that you've brought forth the seeming contradiction of that text is that truly wisdom can acknowledge all contradiction and bring it all to one. And I feel like the work that you've done with the Sol Invictus Tarot and the Pistis Sophia Tarot is showing that continuity and that oneness and the expression of the divine in its many forms, but at the same time that there is still sort of one stream of which we are all a part. So thank you so much for sharing that magical confirmation and how you drew that card at just the right time. It sounds just like it was probably a deliriously happy moment of,
It was. Yes.
Oh, well, I had hoped that today we could do a 3-card reading using your deck. And if you each have one there, I've got one here. I thought maybe each of us would draw one card. And I didn't want us to, feel like we had to give a portentous message about any particular thing happening in our wildly chaotic world at this time. Rather, I thought perhaps we could each just draw one card of wisdom that people can carry forth into the next week and month, and we'll each offer an interpretation of our card. So who'd like to go first? Either of you, or would you like me to go first? Maybe I should go first because I'm not the creator, and so my interpretation may be rudimentary compared to what you're capable of offering. So, great mother, holy mother, wise and gentle mother, abundant and loving mother, protective and healing mother, I call to you. I'm here today with Kim and Nick and the members of Tea and Tarot, and together we're seeking information and guidance from the Pistis Sophia Majors Only deck. We call upon all the benevolent ancestors, guardians, and guides who walk through this life with us. We ask you to be here now and to guide this reading. We come to this reading together today with courage and strength, honesty and integrity, love, compassion, and gratitude for the journey of life. And may what we learn here today be of benefit to us all. And turning outward, may what we learn here today, in some way, great or small, also be of benefit to the entire universe. Right. So I have drawn Justice, Ma'at. And this is interesting because this morning, my morning draw from a different oracle was all about learning to not be right, not have to be right. And so, of course, what I see in the card of Ma'at is the anatomical heart balanced by the feather of Ma'at's truth. I see her eyes presiding over this tree of life, but this tree of life appears to be made of light and has a strong root system, so that you can see that there's an element here of as above, so below, which is a theme that comes up throughout the book. You mentioned that. I see the individual standing at the base of the tree, and I'm not certain, but it might be Ma'at herself, because the figure also seems to bear the same white feather at her brow that Ma'at has here, and that's also in the scale. And what I know about the story of Ma'at is that at the end of our lives, our souls are carried to the realm beyond, and they're weighed, our hearts are weighed against Ma'at's feather, and that symbolically, if our hearts are as light as her feather, meaning our hearts have been just and true, then we're not going to have any problems going on to the next phase. But if our hearts are out of balance with truth and justice, then we will fall into perdition. So what I'm thinking that is very important for me in just everything in my day today, how this card is meeting me today, is that there are ways to be right without replicating the activities of the oppressor or replicating the activities of injustice, and that injustice will not be able to fight injustice. That in fact, with that kind of as above, so below metaphor that I see in the tree, we're not going to be able to use the harms of the oppressor to end the harms of the oppressor. In fact, whatever we do will have resonance beyond our own action. So I think today Ma'at is showing up as we are amidst some very tense times in the United States and worldwide, to remind me that Ma'at is watching, and that I myself have to find a way to move along a separate vector from the activities of oppression or the activities of trying to suppress anyone else, even if I disagree, even if I think they're wrong. And instead, I have to find a way to move truly through the world. So that's my humble interpretation of your card, and I hope I've done it justice.
It's a powerful interpretation. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, who'd like to go next?
Go on, Nick.
Moon card.
I thought she'd show up.
So yeah, in this deck is Morgan Le Fay, and she's here in many guises. And sorry, the cat is meowing at me as I sit here.
She has a lot to say about Morgan Le Fay.
Your little fey cat.
So yeah, with this card, it's, I think,
She's a hard one.
Yeah.
She's elusive.
For a one card reading about the weekend, it's it's anything could happen. I think, yeah, with the moon, it's telling us that things aren't always as they appear on the surface, and not necessarily in a bad way, but things that might appear in one form can be something completely different and that you weren't expecting. And same with people, really, that people have many layers and put on many different faces in different situations, and it's not always a bad thing, but it can be. So I think about the face you show to the world, and I need to think about that one a bit more.
Well, if I do mine, and then you can add anything about yours afterwards.
Yeah, I think if we see them all together, it might.
Yeah. Okay. I have the star, Ushas. So Ushas is a Vedic goddess. I say Vedic rather than Hindu because she's quite one of the more ancient goddesses of Indian mythology. And she's mentioned in some of the earliest texts. Many of the Vedas mention her. And one of the things that I found most beautiful about Ushas is the fact that usually we would see this card at nighttime. But we've got her at dawn because she's praised by her priests at dawn, and she brought in the new hope of the new day. And her skirts was said to paint the sky. So she's almost this artist of the new day, offering us a chance to create something new every single time we wake up, which I think is this wonderful promise of renewal on a very mundane level, but at the same time, there is a spiritual element to it, because they're not separate. So to me, as the final card of a 3-card reading, she's this wonderful hope, but not hope that we're going to get through the darkness, hope that every single time we want to make a change, we can, hope that every time we want to rejuvenate ourselves, we can, and hope that every time we want to create something more and better, we can. So to me, she's also about not rejecting the darkness, not rejecting the nighttime, but rejoicing in the daytime and the light. Like her.
I love her. Yes. And that actually interestingly sheds a lot of light on that moon card.
Yeah.
And Nick, anything you'd add after hearing that?
Yeah, I think like accepting that that aspect of the moon that people are a bit about, that it's to do with trickery and negativity. We just have to accept that those things exist in the world, and there are going to be people who try to trap us and trick us, but as just Kim was saying with the star, there's always that hope, and it's not a final thing.
I hope you're right. I think, amidst everything that we've endured in 2020, I mean, if I were trying to release a new deck amidst this year, wow, everybody needs this deck. I really think to get through the rest of 2020, everyone needs this deck. And certainly I can see where, there is in our little 3-card draw today, acknowledgement that things are not always savory and that cycles have repeated that have caused great harm again and again, such as war, white supremacy, things that we've seen, trickery in government worldwide, but that we ourselves can bring the dawn. We ourselves can bring our army of colorful characters and start and create something new that will truly be just and whole. And I think that's a hope that can get us all through even these difficult times that we're living in. Thank you so much today, Kim and Nick, for your sweetness, your kindness, your inspiration, your art, your intellect, all the hard work that you put into the Pistis Sophia Goddess Tarot. So this is now available. I've seen it online. Where can we, if we want to find out more about you, the deck, your work, your ongoing projects, how do we find each of you?
Well, there's a Facebook page for the deck, which if you go to Facebook and type in Pistis Sophia the Goddess Tarot, it's on there. There'll be things on Red Feather's website about the deck. There's a blog post coming out soon, I think next week, about that. And I've got a separate page for my artwork, so you can find me there, and on Instagram as well, Nick Phillips Sacred Art.
Thank you.
And if people are interested to read more from us or find our other deck, here is the Sol Invictus, the God Tarot. This is a full 78 card deck rather than majors only. And that is intended to be, they're intended to be a pair, so a brother and sister deck. You can also find out more about my work if you're interested in anthologies about mythology, folklore, magic, the occult, from Avalonia Books. They're a publishing company based in Glastonbury, UK. And of course, if you would like more of my writing on tarot, you can check out Tarot Apocalypsis, which I did with Eric C. Dunn, and Tarot Illuminati, and Tarot 101.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to talk with you both today. And I wish you the very best with your deck and with all your next projects.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.